What's up everybody, Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to install these Grimm OffRoad tubular upper control arms on your Toyota Tacoma. A quick word of warning before we get started. This install is a little bit more difficult than most upper control arm installs, and a lot of that just has to do with the design that Toyota has for their arms. If you are concerned about having to damage your truck in any sort of way, or you're not super comfortable with suspension work, this might not be the job you want to tackle in your driveway. You are going to be required to bend a little bit of sheet metal on that inner fender and kind of use a punch and work the pivot bolt out. So there's some time involved in really like wiggling things free to make this work, and it's not a ton of fun, but it has to be done if you're gonna make the swap. So I just wanted to put that all up front so you know before you get into it. But with that being said, let's start the install. Once you have your front wheel off the truck, come in here to the top of the upper control arm, and you're gonna wanna use a 10mm socket to undo the screw that's holding on the brake line. Now we're going to come to the back of the arm and we're going to loosen up this pivot bolt that runs through and secures the arm to the truck. And you're just going to use 2 3/4 inch wrenches for this to kind of break it free, but we're not going to take it all the way off yet. We're just going to loosen it. Now on the castle nut down here for the ball joint, we're going to remove this cotter pin securing it, and we'll just use a screwdriver to kind of pry back the hook on it here. Pop that out and pull it through. Now we're going to use a 19mm socket to loosen up this castle nut, but we're not going to take it all the way off. I'm just going to back it down a couple threads to get it loose, and then we can tap the knuckle before we remove it. Now typically what happens here is that the ball joint is still seized into the knuckle even though we've loosened the nut, and that is the case. So we're going to bring a hammer up and we're going to hit the knuckle right here. We don't want to smash into the castle nut or smash the arm, but we're going to tap right here, break that free, and once the ball joint pops up and the arm is loose, then we can remove the nut the rest of the way. Now we can pull this nut off the rest of the way. So what I like to do now before removing the pivot bolt is grab a pry tool. We're gonna pop off all these little plastic clips holding the splash guards in place, and we're gonna drop those down so we have a bit more room to work with, because this pivot bolt's gonna be a bit of a trick to work out. We're gonna have to move it this way and actually bend the fender. So let's get these clips off here first so we can see what we're doing. Now we can back this nut off here from the pivot bolt. And we'll take the washer off as well. With those out of the way, you can see pretty quickly as we start to push this end up, it's going to make contact with the inside of the fender over here. Sadly, the only way to work around this is we're going to need to push the bolt back a little bit, grab some channel locks or some sort of pry tool here, and start bending this metal back. And then once we have it clear, we can kind of work the pivot bolt up into the engine bay and around some of the lines and electricals back here. And that will give us the ability to get it all the way free so we can finally pull the arm out. But I won't beat around the bush. It's a really difficult process. It helps quite a bit if you can get a punch or a screwdriver in here to tap that pivot bolt the rest of the way out and just give it that extra nudge. But in order to do that, we do have to move these brake lines a little. They get right in the way of where this hole is when you're trying to line it up. So if you use a 12mm socket, you can see a little screw kind of hidden back here behind this wiring harness. We're going to back that out. It'll loosen up the bracket so we can bend these brake lines just slightly to give us a little more room, and then we can actually push it all the way through. Now we'll lift that bracket up, and I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on it to bend it out of the way here, but you don't want to crack these lines. We're just flexing them ever so slightly to get them a little bit more room, and with a little play in there too, we can kind of push, but once again, you don't want to break these. So we're just going to slide our screwdriver in here. Once again, a punch works really well too. You don't need a lot of force though. We're not going to smash the screwdriver up, just enough to start tapping this to bring that pivot bolt forward. And then you definitely want to go around from the top and look in and make sure you're not pushing against wiring harnesses back there, because if you shove this bolt through it and tear that wiring or break anything, it's going to make for a really bad day. I've managed to get the pivot bolt almost all the way pushed through, so I'm just gonna wiggle it a little bit further with my fingers here. And then kind of work this arm, get that ABS line around it. There we go. We can bring that forward. And we'll also bring the bolt and the washer out here. Now, when you get your Grimm upper control arms and you pull them out of the box, you will have a little bit of assembly to do here. So first thing is you're gonna need to grease up these bushings and sleeves, pop them through in the back mounts. Then after you've done that, you can flip it over. You're obviously gonna need to add the grease fittings here as well. These are gonna come in that kit. Then once you've tackled that, up front, you're gonna wanna add the taper adapter here through the Uniball, get all this attached. It's basically just 2 pieces with a 1/2 inch screw on the top that you're gonna tighten down. So after all of that is done and the arm's assembled, now we can get to work putting this into the actual truck. So once you have your arm sitting in place here, kind of near where the mount is gonna be, you do have some spacers that are gonna come with the Grimm kit, and you're gonna need one on each side of the bushing. So they'll kind of sandwich in between to get rid of some of the slack for side to side movement in this arm and keep it steady. But wedging these in here can be a real trick. There's not a super easy way to do it. You kind of just have to start running the pivot bolt through, get them in as you go, and hope for the best. All right, there we go. We're gonna lift the arm up and get the taper adapter into place through the knuckle here. And we've got a few threads coming through on the bottom. So now we just wanna try and get the washer and the new nut threaded on here. Since we've got the Uniball tightened into the knuckle, we're gonna move to the back and tighten up this nut the rest of the way on the pivot bolt. Now that we're not gonna really need to get back in here by the pivot bolt anymore, we can bring this bracket back into place, line it up with the hole in the frame, and we'll just reinstall the screw that we pulled out. Next up, we're gonna reinstall these little splash guards with those factory plastic clips and just push them all back into place. Now we need to reinstall this bracket for our ABS lines, and we're just gonna pull the nut off the top here. And then there's 2 washers sitting on the stud. You're gonna wanna leave one in place. We'll move the bracket over the top, push it down. Then we can drop the second washer on top of it, and we'll tighten this nut down over the top of that. And even though this is a different nut, obviously, than the factory screw that was in here, it's still a 10mm, so we're just gonna use a socket to get that the rest of the way. With the arm locked into place on the truck, now is a good time to go back, grab your 1/2 inch socket. We're gonna loosen up this bolt that goes through the Uniball, put a little bit of that red Loctite on there, and then screw it back into place and torque it down. It's a lot easier to do this now when the arm can't move than it is to try and do it on the bench. So I've got our socket here, we'll back this thing off. Now, if you bought the separate billet cover caps for your Uniballs, we're gonna put those on next, but if you didn't get the caps, then you're all good to go. Everything's complete, and from here, all you wanna do is just go back through with a torque wrench, double check all of your bolts and everything that you've loosened or touched during the install, In your guide, you'll actually see that the torque specs are listed, so most of it is to factory spec, but if anything changed, it's going to be in your guide, and it's a good way to double check it. But for the caps, all we're going to use here is a 3M adhesive ring to put this on, so I'm going to wipe this down first with an alcohol pad, and then we'll stick it in. All right, guys, that is gonna be a wrap on this upper control arm install for the Tacoma. As you saw, it's a little bit of a struggle to get these in there, but once they're in, it's a really nice upgrade over stock. Obviously, having a Uniball that isn't gonna bind and a stronger tubular arm is gonna be just a lot better off-road than using a factory piece of equipment that isn't designed to take the abuse that these can. Now, with that being said, these arms are also specifically built and bent in a way that helps correct for camber and caster adjustments in the vehicle. So the idea is that they're designed to work with something that has a little bit of a lift on it. Maybe you've added, leveling struts like we have, or an actual lift kit or a spacer. This is going to correct for that. So with that being said, it is recommended that you get your truck professionally aligned. I know not everybody likes to do that for upper control arms, and some people think it doesn't matter, but because of the design of these Grimm ones, I definitely do recommend you get that done. With that being said, if you guys are interested in picking up a set of these arms for your Toyota Tacoma, we're going to have some links down in the description that'll shoot you over to our website, and you can check those out. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.